I died 3 times in one day. Each time, I stepped closer to a world beyond our own, a realm of golden roads and familiar faces I'd never met. But it was the message from Jesus that changed everything. My name is Landon Whitley, and I'm here to tell you about the day I died, the heaven I saw, and the shocking truth Jesus revealed to me. It's a story that will challenge everything you think you know about life, death, and what comes after. It was a Sunday morning like any other for the Whitley family. We had just finished our weekly church service, and the air was filled with that familiar mix of peace and anticipation for the day ahead. I remember climbing into the back seat of our car, my parents, Andy and Julie, settling into the front. The soft hum of the engine and the gentle sway of the car as we drove home was so normal, so unremarkable. I was just an ordinary 8-year-old boy thinking about lunch and maybe playing with my friends later. As we approached an intersection, everything seemed perfectly routine. The traffic light turned green, and my dad eased the car forward. That's when I saw it. An ambulance suddenly appearing, its sirens blaring. In that split second, time seemed to slow down. I saw my dad's eyes widen in the rearview mirror, heard my mom's sharp intake of breath. Then, chaos erupted. The impact was deafening. Metal crunched, and glass shattered as our car collided with the ambulance. I felt myself being thrown forward. Then everything went dark. When I came to, the world around me was a blur of frantic voices and flashing lights. I could barely make out the twisted metal of our car, now barely recognizable. I tried to move, to call out to my parents, but my body wouldn't respond. Through the haze of pain and confusion, I caught glimpses of paramedics rushing around. Someone was gently lifting me from the wreckage, their words a jumble of urgent commands and reassurances. As I was placed on a stretcher, I caught sight of my parents. My dad, Andy, was motionless, while my mom, Julie, was being tended to by paramedics. The fear in her eyes as she looked at me is something I'll never forget. I wanted to tell her I was okay, but the words wouldn't come. The ride to the hospital was a blur of sirens and worried faces. I drifted in and out of consciousness, each time feeling like I was floating further away from my body. The last thing I remember before everything went black was a doctor leaning over me, his face etched with concern. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that I had just experienced my first clinical death. My heart had stopped, my brain activity had ceased. To the medical team frantically working to save me, I was gone. But this was just the beginning of my journey. As the doctors fought to bring me back, I was embarking on an experience that would change my life forever. I was about to witness things no living person had seen, to receive a message that would shake the foundations of everything I thought I knew about life and death. In those crucial moments, as my body lay lifeless on the hospital bed, my spirit was venturing into a realm beyond our understanding. A place where golden roads stretched out before me, and familiar faces I'd never met greeted me with love and warmth. But the most profound encounter was yet to come, a meeting that would give me a mission and a message to bring back to the world of the living. While I experienced visions of golden roads and loving faces, my mother Julie faced a parent's worst nightmare. With my father gone and my life hanging by a thread, she clung to a hope that seemed to grow dimmer with each passing moment. Little did anyone realize that my journey between two worlds would challenge everything modern medicine thought it knew about life, death, and the human spirit. The hospital corridor buzzed with frantic activity. Doctors and nurses rushed back and forth, their faces etched with worry and determination. My mom, Julie, sat alone in the waiting room, her world shattered in an instant. She'd lost her husband, and now her son was fighting for his life. I can only imagine the turmoil she felt. Grief for my dad, fear for me, and a desperate hope that somehow, against all odds, I would pull through. Inside the emergency room, a team of dedicated medical professionals worked tirelessly to save me. Their hands moved with practiced precision, performing CPR and using defibrillators to try and restart my heart. But my body had other plans. Time and again, my heart would stop, plunging me into clinical death. And each time, the doctors would bring me back, only for the cycle to repeat. As the hours ticked by, I could sense the growing pessimism among the medical team. They'd seen cases like mine before, and the outlook was grim. Multiple clinical deaths often lead to severe brain damage, even if the patient survives. The doctors exchanged worried glances, their hushed conversations filled with terms like cognitive impairment and vegetative state. I learned later that patients in my condition typically face devastating neurological outcomes. The brain can only go without oxygen for so long before damage becomes irreversible. With each resuscitation, the chances of me waking up, let alone waking up as myself, grew slimmer. But while my physical body lay still on that hospital bed, my consciousness was on an incredible journey. I floated through a realm of indescribable beauty and peace. I saw things that defy explanation, felt a love so pure and overwhelming it seemed to fill every part of my being. And all the while, back in the physical world, the doctors fought to bring me back. Then, against all medical expectations, something miraculous happened. My eyes fluttered open. The room came into focus, and I saw the stunned faces of the medical team gathered around me. Their expressions of shock quickly turned to joy and disbelief. Not only was I awake, but I was alert and responsive, a far cry from the vegetative state they'd feared. As the news spread through the hospital, my mom rushed to my bedside. Tears streamed down her face as she held my hand, her eyes searching mine for any sign of the son she knew. And that's when I spoke my first words since the accident, words that would shake her to her core and set the stage for an incredible story of faith, love, and the mysteries that lie beyond our world. "Mom," I said, my voice weak but clear, "I saw Dad and Jesus. They told me I have to come back." The room fell silent, and in that moment, everyone present knew they were witnessing something truly extraordinary. My journey between two worlds had only just begun, and the message I brought back would change everything. The silence in the room was deafening. My mom's eyes widened with a mix of hope and disbelief. "Jesus?" she whispered. I nodded, my mind racing with vivid memories of a realm beyond imagination. But as I opened my mouth to elaborate, I realized something unsettling. My earthly words seemed woefully inadequate to capture the divine. I took a deep breath and tried to explain what I'd experienced during those moments when my heart had stopped beating. It was as if my consciousness had left my body entirely, floating above the chaos of the hospital room. I watched the doctors working frantically to save me, but I felt no fear or pain. Instead, I was filled with an overwhelming sense of peace. Then, in an instant, I found myself in a place unlike anything I'd ever seen before. The colors were more vibrant than anything on Earth, shimmering with a life of their own. Golden roads stretched out before me, seeming to pulse with energy. The air itself felt alive, filled with a warmth that embraced me like a loving hug. But it wasn't just the sights that amazed me. I felt things I'd never experienced before, a profound sense of belonging, of being truly home. Love surrounded me, pure and unconditional, so intense it almost had a physical presence. I tried to explain this to my mom and the doctors, but I could see the confusion in their eyes. How could I make them understand something so far beyond our everyday reality? As I continued my account, I described the beings I encountered. They weren't quite like the angels you see in paintings or movies. These were beings of light, radiating love and wisdom. Some of them felt familiar, as if I'd known them my entire life, even though I'd never met them before. They communicated with me, not through words, but through a kind of telepathy that conveyed entire concepts in an instant. I could see the doctors exchanging glances, their scientific minds struggling to reconcile what I was saying with their medical knowledge. But I pressed on, knowing I had to share the most important part of my experience. That's when I saw him, Jesus. The moment our eyes met, I knew him instantly. It wasn't because he looked like the paintings or statues I'd seen in church. It was something deeper, a recognition that went beyond physical appearance. The love that emanated from him was unlike anything I'd ever felt, so pure, so complete, it seemed to fill every part of my being. What surprised me most wasn't just meeting Jesus, but how he made me feel. In his presence, I felt completely known and completely accepted. All my flaws, all my mistakes, none of it mattered. He looked at me with eyes full of love and understanding, and in that moment, I understood what unconditional love truly meant. As I finished recounting my encounter with Jesus, I could see tears in my mom's eyes. The doctors stood in stunned silence, their medical charts forgotten. I knew my experience challenged everything they thought they knew about life and death. but I also knew that what I'd seen was real, more real than anything I'd ever experienced in my earthly life. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. The message Jesus had given me, the reason he'd sent me back, was about to change everything. Have you ever felt like your entire existence was leading up to a single moment? As Jesus looked into my eyes, I realized that everything, my life, my death, and my miraculous return, had been preparation for what he was about to tell me. The weight of his impending words pressed upon me, filling me with both anticipation and awe. In that moment, as Jesus began to speak, I felt a love so profound it seemed to wrap around my very soul. His presence radiated warmth and understanding, making me feel completely known and accepted. It was as if every worry, every fear I'd ever had simply melted away in the light of his love. Jesus' voice resonated through my entire being, carrying a message that would change not just my life, but potentially the lives of countless others. He told me that it wasn't my time yet, that I had a purpose to fulfill on earth. His words were gentle but firm, filled with a wisdom that seemed to span eternity. "Landon," he said, his eyes full of compassion, "I'm sending you back. You have a mission, a message to share with the world." I listened intently, trying to absorb every word, every nuance of what he was telling me. The message was both simple and profound. Heaven is real, and life continues beyond the grave. As Jesus spoke, I felt a growing sense of responsibility settling over me. He was entrusting me with a truth that could bring hope and comfort to so many people. I realized that my near-death experience wasn't just about me, it was about everyone who would hear my story. The emotions that washed over me were overwhelming. I felt humbled that Jesus would choose me for this task, excited about the prospect of sharing what I'd seen, and a little scared about the challenges I might face. But above all, I felt a deep sense of peace and purpose. Jesus continued, explaining that my mission was to spread a message of hope and faith. He wanted me to tell people about the reality of heaven, to assure them that death is not the end. I knew that this message could transform lives, offering comfort to those grieving and hope to those struggling with their faith. As our encounter drew to a close, Jesus gave me one final instruction. "Remember, Landon," he said, his voice filled with love, "I am always with you. Even when you return to earth, even in your darkest moments, I will be there." With those words, I felt a surge of strength and courage. I knew then that my life would never be the same. The message Jesus had given me wasn't just words to be repeated. It was a calling, a divine purpose that would shape the rest of my days on earth. As I prepared to return to my earthly body, I silently vowed to honor this mission, to share the love and hope I'd experienced with everyone I could. Little did I know how challenging and rewarding this journey would be. As I began to feel myself being pulled back to consciousness, back to the hospital room, and my grieving mother, I held on to Jesus' words. They would be my anchor in the days, months, and years to come, guiding me as I navigated a world forever changed by my glimpse of heaven. My eyes fluttered open, and the stark white ceiling of the hospital room came into focus. The steady beep of monitors filled my ears as I became aware of my surroundings. I turned my head slightly, wincing at the stiffness in my neck, and saw my mom's tear-stained face. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she realized I was awake. "Landon?" she whispered, her voice trembling with hope and fear. The room erupted into a flurry of activity. Doctors and nurses rushed to my bedside, their faces a mix of shock and amazement. I heard snippets of their conversations. Words like miracle and unprecedented floated around me. One doctor, his forehead creased with confusion, kept shaking his head as he checked my vitals. I tried to speak, but my throat felt dry and scratchy. A nurse gently offered me some water, and as I sipped, I became aware of how weak my body felt. Every movement was an effort, yet my mind felt surprisingly clear and alert. "How do you feel, Landon?" the doctor asked, his pen poised over a chart. I paused, considering the question. "I feel different," I said slowly. "Like I've been on a long journey." The doctor exchanged a glance with my mom, who squeezed my hand tightly. "You've been through a lot, son," he said gently. "Do you remember what happened?" As I began to recount the car accident, I saw the surprise on their faces grow. My memories were vivid and detailed, defying their expectations of trauma-induced memory loss. But it wasn't until I started talking about what I'd experienced while I was gone that the room fell into a stunned silence. "I saw Jesus," I said, my voice growing stronger. "And Dad. They were waiting for me." My mom's breath caught in her throat. "Andy?" she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. I nodded, then hesitated. There was something else, something I knew would shock her even more. "Mom," I said softly, "I saw them. The babies you lost." Her face paled and I heard a sharp intake of breath from one of the nurses. What do you mean, Landon?" my mom asked, her voice barely audible. "Your miscarriages, Mom. I saw them in heaven. They're beautiful and they're waiting for us." The room fell silent. My mom's hand trembled in mine as tears streamed down her face. The doctor stood frozen, his chart forgotten. I knew then that what I was saying was beyond their understanding, challenging everything they thought they knew about life and death. As I continued to share details about my experience, the golden roads, the overwhelming love, the message from Jesus, I could see the awe and wonder growing on their faces. Even the most skeptical among them seemed shaken by the specificity of my account. Little did I know that this was just the beginning. My awakening wasn't just a medical miracle. It was the start of a journey that would challenge beliefs, offer hope, and touch lives in ways I could never have imagined. While doctors marveled at my physical recovery, my mother faced a different kind of awakening. How does a grieving widow reconcile the joy of her son's survival with the pain of her husband's death? Julie's journey through this emotional minefield would test the limits of her faith and redefine her understanding of life beyond death. I watched as my mom, Julie, sat by my hospital bed, her eyes filled with a storm of emotions. She'd squeeze my hand tightly, relief washing over her face, only to be replaced moments later by a profound sadness. I knew she was thinking about Dad, about the life we'd lost in an instant. "I don't understand, Landon," she said softly one afternoon, her voice trembling. "I'm so grateful you're alive, but why did God take your father?" I could see the internal struggle playing out across her features, the joy of my survival warring with the crushing grief of Dad's absence. At first, Mom approached my stories of heaven with cautious skepticism. I'd catch her exchanging glances with the doctors, silently questioning if my experience was just a product of trauma or medication. But as I shared more details, things I couldn't possibly have known, I saw doubt give way to wonder in her eyes. One pivotal moment came when I described Dad as I'd seen him in heaven. "He was wearing his favorite flannel shirt, Mom," I said. "The blue one with the little hole in the sleeve that he always refused to throw away." Mom's breath caught in her throat. She'd packed away Dad's clothes days ago before I'd regained consciousness. There was no way I could have known about that shirt. As the days passed, I watched Mom's perspective slowly shift. She'd listen intently as I recounted my encounters with Jesus, her expression softening. Sometimes, she'd close her eyes, as if trying to picture the scenes I described. "It sounds so beautiful, Landon," she'd whisper, a mix of longing and hope in her voice. One evening, as the setting sun cast a warm glow across my hospital room, Mom opened up about her own faith journey. "I've always believed in God," she said, her fingers absently tracing the cross pendant she wore. "But after losing your father, I felt so angry, so lost. Your experience, it's making me see things differently." I could sense Mom wrestling with big questions about life, death, and what comes after. She'd bring books on near-death experiences to the hospital, poring over them while I slept. Sometimes she'd ask me questions, comparing my account to others she'd read about. With each conversation, I saw a spark of something new ignite in her eyes. Not just belief, but a profound sense of comfort. The turning point came when I shared Jesus' message of love and purpose. As I recounted his words, tears streamed down Mom's face. "He said Dad is waiting for us, Mom," I said gently, "and that we still have work to do here." For the first time since the accident, I saw a genuine smile break through her grief. In that moment, I realized that my experience wasn't just about me. It was a lifeline for Mom, a bridge between crushing loss and hope for the future. As she embraced me, I felt the tension she'd been carrying begin to melt away. "Thank you, Landon," she whispered, for bringing a piece of heaven back to me. Little did we know, my story would soon reach beyond the walls of that hospital room, touching lives and challenging beliefs in ways we never could have imagined. Have you ever tried to describe a color to someone who's never seen it? That's how it felt trying to share my experience of heaven. But as more people listened, something unexpected happened. My words started to paint a picture that would change lives forever. At first, I only shared my story with my family and the doctors. Their reactions ranged from awe to disbelief. My mom listened with tears in her eyes, while some of the nurses exchanged skeptical glances. But I knew what I had seen was real, and I felt compelled to share it with others. When I finally left the hospital, word of my experience had already started to spread through our small town. Friends from school would stop by, curious to hear about my brush with death. I told them about the golden roads, the overwhelming love, and my encounter with Jesus. Some listened with wide-eyed wonder, while others shifted uncomfortably, unsure what to make of my story. The local church was one of the first places I spoke publicly about my experience. I remember standing at the pulpit, my hands shaking slightly as I looked out at the congregation. As I began to speak, I saw a mix of emotions on their faces: hope, skepticism, and everything in between. But as I continued, describing the peace and love I felt in heaven, I noticed a change. People leaned forward in their seats, hanging on every word. One of the biggest challenges I faced was conveying the indescribable nature of what I had seen. How could I explain colors that don't exist on Earth or the feeling of being embraced by pure love? I learned to use analogies and focus on the emotions I felt, rather than trying to paint an exact picture. As my story spread, more and more people reached out to hear it firsthand. I spoke at churches, community centers, and even small gatherings in people's homes. Each time I shared my experience, I saw how it impacted those listening. There was the woman who had recently lost her husband, who found comfort in knowing he was at peace. The teenager struggling with his faith, who felt a renewed sense of purpose after hearing about the love of Jesus. One particularly memorable moment came after speaking at a nearby town. An older man approached me, his eyes brimming with tears. "I've been an atheist my whole life," he told me, "but hearing your story, it's made me question everything I thought I knew." His words struck me deeply, reminding me of the responsibility that came with sharing my experience. As my audience grew, so did the impact of my message. People who had never given much thought to the afterlife began to ponder its reality. Those who had lost loved ones found solace in the idea of reunion beyond death. Even skeptics found themselves reconsidering their beliefs in the face of the details and conviction of my account. The transformation I witnessed in people's beliefs about the afterlife was profound. Fear of death gave way to hope. Grief was tempered by the knowledge that loved ones were at peace. And for many, the idea of a loving God waiting to welcome them home brought a new sense of purpose to their earthly lives. As my story continued to touch lives and challenge beliefs, I realized that my journey was far from over. The message Jesus had given me was spreading, but with it came new challenges and responsibilities. How would I continue to share this divine truth in a world often skeptical of the supernatural? The path ahead was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. My mission had only just begun. Imagine carrying a message so powerful, you'd risk ridicule and disbelief just to share it. Years after my near-death experience, I faced a choice: live a normal life or become a messenger for something greater than myself. It wasn't an easy decision, but the memory of Jesus' words and the love I felt in heaven guided me forward. My life has changed in ways I never could have imagined before that fateful day. Where once I was just a typical kid, now I carry a profound sense of purpose. Every morning, I wake up with the knowledge that I've been given a second chance, not just at life, but at making a real difference in the world. But let me tell you, it hasn't been all smooth sailing. Sharing my experience has come with its fair share of challenges. Some people look at me with skepticism, their eyes narrowing as I recount my journey to heaven. Others dismiss my story outright, chalking it up to a child's overactive imagination or the effects of trauma. There are days when the doubt and criticism weigh heavily on me, making me question if I'm really cut out for this mission. Despite the obstacles, I've stayed committed to spreading the message Jesus gave me. I've spoken at churches, schools, and community centers, sharing my story with anyone willing to listen. It's not always easy to put my experience into words. How do you describe colors more vivid than anything on earth? Or a love so pure it seems to have a physical presence? But I try, because I know how much comfort and hope it can bring to others. Over the years, my understanding of what happened to me has evolved. As I've grown older, I've come to see my experience not just as a personal revelation, but as a reminder of something bigger than all of us. It's shown me that there's more to life than what we can see and touch, that love and connection exist beyond the boundaries of our physical world. My efforts to help others have taken many forms. Sometimes it's as simple as sitting with someone who's lost a loved one, sharing the peace I felt in heaven and the assurance that death is not the end. Other times, it's about encouraging people to live with more kindness and compassion, inspired by the overwhelming love I experienced on the other side. As I look to the future, I'm filled with a mix of excitement and determination. There's still so much work to be done, so many people searching for meaning and hope. I want to reach them all, to share the message that changed my life so profoundly. My perspective on life and death has been completely transformed. Where once I might have feared the unknown, now I see death as a transition, a stepping stone to something beautiful beyond our imagination. This understanding has given me a deep sense of peace and purpose that guides everything I do. As I continue on this path, sharing my story and the love I experienced in heaven, I'm reminded of something Jesus told me. I am always with you. Those words give me strength when the challenges seem overwhelming, reminding me that this journey is about something much bigger than myself. It's about bringing a piece of heaven to earth, one person at a time. As I reflect on Landon's incredible journey, I'm struck by the profound impact it's had on so many lives. His experience has not only transformed him and his family, but has touched countless others who've heard his story. Landon's glimpse of heaven has offered a unique perspective on life, death, and what lies beyond, challenging our understanding of existence itself. His account reminds us that there's more to our world than what meets the eye. It speaks to the power of faith and the potential for transformation, even in the face of tragedy. Landon's words echo in my mind. Jesus told me it wasn't my time. I have a mission that I need to go back and tell people about him, to tell them that heaven is real and that we have a purpose beyond this life. In a world often filled with uncertainty and fear, Landon's story offers a beacon of hope. It suggests that love transcends death and that our lives have meaning beyond our earthly existence. As we grapple with life's big questions, perhaps Landon's experience can inspire us to live with more purpose, compassion, and faith in something greater than ourselves.